This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. Fellas, you've heard the phrase, look good, feel good, right? But why not add smell good to that too? That's where Sterling Soap Company comes in. First, Sterling Soap is 100% natural and has a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne. Second, there's a scent just for you. How about burgundy? Yeah, it's more than a color. The Sterling Soap folks blend natural essential oils with hints of mahogany, golden amber, and sandalwood. Or how about D503, an intensely masculine scent inspired by Legend by Mont Blanc. And third, you will feel good about the price. For just a little more than you'd pay at the grocery store, Sterling Soap will leave you feeling clean, refreshed, and ready for whatever's next. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Historically Speaking Sports podcast right here on the Sports History Network, and we're starting this episode a little bit differently this episode because what you're going to hear in the next few minutes is us determining what our topic is for this particular episode. You, of course, already know because you've seen it in the title. We, Chuck and I, we don't know what the topic is. So what you're going to be hearing is just a raw and unfiltered reaction to what we're going to do. So here's the situation. We've determined that this episode is going to be, we haven't came up with a working title yet, but I'm leaning towards something like a year in the league. And what we're going to do is select from 5 major leagues. Well, not really major leagues, but 5 sports and leagues within our wheelhouse, which is Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, college football, and college basketball. We're going to randomly generate a team, randomly generate a league, and then randomly generate a year. That way you'll be able to, we're going to sit and talk about that particular year in that particular league. So you're going to have an unfiltered and uncensored reaction for what we're going to do. It could be funny. It may be have some cursing. We don't know what's going to happen because we don't know what we're going to be talking about. But you guys already do. So you get a chance to see behind the scenes how we figure this out. Joining us to spin the magic wheel, so to speak, is my better half, my beautiful wife, Nicole, who's joining us. Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
But she's joining us, and so she's going to be spinning the wheel. So first of all, we're going to be determining which league. So Chuck, do you have any particular ideas or feelings about this, or what you're anticipating?
Well, I'm just anticipating. Sounds like a lot of fun, and the ball could literally bounce anyway. So I'm just looking forward to whatever. So it's kind of spontaneous, and I tend to like spontaneity. So
all right, so you already got a good attitude. So I appreciate that. So without further ado, we're going to see which league we're going to do. So we numbered it 1 through 5, and the numbers are corresponding to a certain league. 1 is Major League Baseball. Number 2 is the NFL. 3 is NBA. 4 college football, and 5 college basketball. So without further ado, Miss Nicole, could you hit the random generator button, please, and tell us which is it going to be between 1 and 5?
Okay. And here we go.
It is number 4, which is college football. We just did a college football episode, so now we're doing another college football episode, but this time we're going to be talking about college football within a certain year. And the years that we've chosen is between 1960 and 2015. Before we do that, Chuck, talk about college football again. You know, second episode in the week, we're going to be talking about college football. Did that surprise you at all?
No, I actually, as she was doing it, number 4 actually popped up in my mind. Now, man, if I could just get these darn lottery numbers to do the same, then cooking with some fresh grease then, man. But but looking forward to it. And then, depending on the year, that'll allow us to go a bit more in depth. So let's roll.
Okay. So without further ado, the years that we have is the years between 1960 and 2015. Okay. So.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. And the year is
2002. We're going to be talking about college football in the year 2002. And we kind of touched a little bit on this in this past episode, didn't we?
A little. Well, not quite, but one of the teams I had is going to figure prominently in 2002 being 2001 Miami Hurricanes. So they're going to figure prominently, but we have plenty of material to work with. I'm looking.
We have a good bit of material to work with. Come to think of it,
looking forward to it because some things immediately popped to mind with that year anyway. So looking forward to it.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was how we determined this episode's topic, the 2002 season of college football. We're going to be talking about the Heisman Trophy, certain teams, rule changes, everything that happened within the college year of 2002, heading into New Year's of 2003. So, without further ado, we'll be back in a couple seconds to talk about the 2002 college football season right here on the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast.
Sports from back in the day. From Atlanta, it's Dana on the mic, talking old school legends, bringing history to life. We go deep like a spiral in the Superdome. Back when athletes left the game due to talking alone. Jordan fadeaways, Jackie in the zone, Ali in the ring, man, he stood all alone. From the Negro Leagues to the ABA, we break it all down, yeah, the classic way. It's Charles from the district, straight out the boot. Southern University pride, repping truth in the booth. From Baton Rouge to the nation's capital, legends on deck. Yeah, we factual tales of the greats, gold chains and all. Baseball, who dreams in that football brawl? No clickbait, no fluff, just the facts will say. It's Historically Speaking Sports from back in the game. So sit back, tune in, and hit replay. It's Historically Speaking Sports, the classic way.
The year was 2002. Gas was roughly $1.19 a gallon. A dozen eggs were under $1, and the biggest hits in hip-hop was Getting Hot in Here by Nelly and the song from the movie 8 Mile, Lose Yourself by Eminem. But in the world of college football, the Miami Hurricanes were coming off of a national championship run and was looking to continue their 22-game winning streak, a streak that seemed to have no end in sight. Yet the U was beginning to hear rumbles from other programs looking to knock them off of their lofty perch. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, the place where we give you the best of sports from back in the day. In this episode of the podcast, we will travel back to the year 2002 in college football in our first episode of a series we call A Year in the League, where we talk about all of the headlines, best teams, and memorable moments that made that season so memorable. In addition of the Larry Coker coached Miami Hurricanes, there were other teams that included the USC Trojans that were on the rise and who were led by head coach Pete Carroll and a quarterback Carson Palmer, who went on to win college football's most coveted trophy. Another team that was looking to make noise in college football that year was Oklahoma, who had returned to prominence after years of struggle that followed the exit of their legendary coach Barry Switzer. And also we will revisit one of the most improbable finishes in college football that fans have called the Bluegrass Miracle. Yet that season climaxed in the desert of Arizona in the Fiesta Bowl when a team with a second-year head coach and a freshman running back pulled off one of the biggest upsets of the year in one of the best national championship games ever and brought a national title to a place that hadn't celebrated one for more than a generation. Later in the show, we'll send a shout out to all of the schools in our home state and what they did that season of 2002, including our alma mater, who won their rivalry game for the 9th time in the span of 10 seasons. We have all of that going on and so much more coming up on this all-new edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, a member of the Sports History Network.
Hey there. Welcome to Music Meets Sports, where sports legends meet custom soundtracks. Founded by music producer Ronald Tyke Oliver, Music Meets Sports was created to bridge generations, educate fans, and celebrate the greatness of both current and former athletes. We craft original songs about heroes in basketball, football, baseball, boxing, and beyond, highlighting their struggles and victories. Across all musical genres, we reintroduce fans to their favorite athletes in a way they've never heard before. From Babe Ruth to Reggie White, from rising WNBA stars to timeless NFL great stream, or download our music now on Apple Music, Amazon, and Spotify. Visit musicmeetsports.org to explore the catalog, hear new releases, and join the movement that's preserving sports history, one song at a time.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this all-new edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. I'm Dana Augusta, along with my main man, my sports history partner in crime, Charles Combs, coming at you once again here on the Sports History Network. And as you realize by the title and realize by the introduction, this topic was a little bit of a surprise for us because we put it into a little random number generator to determine what our topic was going to be. And tonight, our topic is the 2002 college football season. And that kind of caught us by surprise, but at the same time, you started digging deep into this, Chuck, and you realize while researching this, there's a good bit here, especially how the season climaxed. And I think this was like an awesome topic that was kind of like randomly selected for us.
Absolutely. It was we kind of touched upon it last episode, at least around that time period with our best 5 teams that we each fielded. And then we kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit and just going a bit more in depth in terms of the 2002 season, which was certainly in a lot of ways exciting, but then in many other ways also surprising as well as controversial.
Yes.
Controversial. So, let's kind of get to it, man. Just looking forward to the discussion and just ready to work, baby.
Okay, and just to start off, just to set the picture for everybody, just to kind of set the stage of what we were getting into after heading into this season, Miami was the defending national champs and the preseason #1 overall team. They entered the season #1, and they were coming in that year with a 22-game winning streak, which, of course, they would extend as the season would progress. But this, I feel like looking at this Miami Hurricanes team was not as strong as it was the previous season, though they were still a damn good team.
I totally concur. They didn't have nearly the just overwhelming depth that they had the previous 2 seasons. And although they still were the most talented team, the chasm of that had kind of diminished a little bit, and kind of, where we kind of touched upon when, in particular, last episode when I talked about the '01 Hurricanes, where basically just don't wreck it because the team was so strong. Just Coker as the coach, as well as Dorsey as the quarterback, just don't wreck the Ferrari, and you would win. Even though it was still a Lambo, it was the chasm was not nearly as pronounced. Therefore, as a result, the margin of error was much smaller, in which
Now,
we would get into.
yeah, exactly. What I was about to ask you was like, did you think that this 2002 team was kind of like living off of the reputation of the '01 team? You know, now you got to remember in 2002, this is the early 2000s, that it just seemed like the epicenter of college football at the time was the state of Florida, because you had the Gators, who was still a top 10 team. You still had Florida State with Coach Bobby Bowden and that cast of characters down in Tallahassee. That state right there, and plus the Miami Hurricanes was still number one team in the country. That state right there was just so loaded with football talent, more than any other place pretty much in the country.
Oh yeah, and I think to a degree, to your point, I think they were skating by on rep to a degree, but also they were in fact the best team by a
Yeah.
considerable margin, nonetheless. Although they were not as strong as they had been the previous two seasons, they were still a very strong ball club. And then you would also think, in addition to that, that they were what they lacked in overwhelming depth, that they would make up for in terms of experience as well. Although they did, have some ascension to certain positions because, like Clinton Portis and Gore had departed. Willis McGay, he had went from RB3 to RB1, and then
Yeah.
things like that. Whereas Shockey had left the year before. Kellen Winslow Jr., even though he saw significant time and had a lot of experience the previous seasons, he was thrust into a starting role as well, even though talented. But they had experience due to the previous years playing, although in much lesser roles.
Whenever you in this season right here with the Miami Hurricanes and number one team in the country, and they were still very dominant as a program, you starting to hear some rumbles from other parts of the country and other programs that have been somewhat dormant is starting to come forward. One of those was out west, and we're talking about USC with Pete Carroll bringing that team back to prominence. They had been down for a number of years, but they were starting to make their way back into the top 10, behind new head coach, with their new head coach, Pete Carroll, and a quarterback, from by name of Carson Palmer. That, of course, we're going to talk way more about them as the season will progress. But you heard some rumblings from them coming to the fore, as well as another team, Oklahoma, where they were starting to get better with with Bob Stoops as coach, and also out in Columbus, you have Jim Tressel, second year head coach of the of Ohio State University. Oh, I'm sorry, the Ohio State University, and that great pronouncement that he made right after he was hired, that in 360 some days, you're going to be even more proud of us by finally beating Michigan, because they were on some sort of a losing streak to Michigan. So these programs, not only the University of Miami that was prominent, but you had all these other programs that was coming forward to challenge the Hurricanes, so to speak.
Correct. To your point, they had a lot of resurrections, most notably USC and Ohio State. And USC, they really, as you mentioned, they were really at the cusp of the run that they would go on as well. Like accumulating a lot of depth and just overwhelming talent, in similar fashion to the Hurricanes who preceded them. And then you also got to talk about Ohio State as well. And then this was still a point in time in which um the the big it was Miami the independent, and then you had mostly Big 12 that were the power teams at the time, like your Nebraskas, your Oklahomas, your Colorados, and so forth. And this was
Yeah.
before the golden age of the SEC, although SEC was very, very good. They were still in the process of, how can I put this? I'm not going to quite say righting some wrongs, but kind of resetting the recruitment map, so to speak, because
Right.
as you and I alluded to in the last episode, since we are both from Louisiana, for example, you know, when we were coming up, if you were a good player from um, inner city New Orleans, inner city Baton Rouge, things like that, LSU wasn't even on your list. And a lot
Right.
of other SEC teams had similar fates, because they, most famously, LSU, they didn't even bother to recruit Cordell Stewart nor Marshall Falk. They recruited Steve Am McNair to play cornerback of all things. And
Yeah.
and so due to that stigma, it was like a lot of the inner city kids like, forget it, not even looking at an SEC school. We're going to, the Florida schools, the Big 12 schools, and so forth. So that was the table that was set then. And then, like you mentioned, it was Miami, the Big 12 schools, the resurgence of Ohio State and all of that, which played a significant role throughout this 2002 season that we're going to discuss.
Right. There was some significant rule changes, and one of the things I want to talk about is rule changes. And the rule changes that happened during this 2002 season wasn't really significant. It wasn't major groundbreaking. For example, penalty for violating the halo rule without making contact with the receiver increased from 5 yards to 10 yards. In other words, if you broke that halo boundary, but you didn't touch the receiver, it was still a penalty, but it was increased from 5 yards to 10 yards. Okay. You really don't see that too much anymore, but that was a big point of contention as far as safety was concerned back in the early 2000s. Um,
Yeah,
you know, Another one, flagrant fouls committed by the defense in overtime will be carried over to the next overtime period. This one I've never seen, and I don't even remember this even being an issue, but I guess the NCAA determined it was. All players were required to wear the same color face mask. I've never seen anybody with different face masks. Never saw that. Maybe you saw something back then. I'd never seen it. Um,
mhm. No, I didn't, because
I've
I
never saw
don't
that.
know.
I never saw that. Maybe, maybe one player had like an older helmet with a different color face mask that they never changed over. I don't know. Penalties committed during a touchdown play can now be either enforced on the point after or the ensuing kickoff. Back then, the coaches, I guess, had a choice. Um, Now, preseason top 25. Now, the preseason top five. We're just going to do the top five. And of course, the number one team in the country, of course, defending national champs, Miami, the aforementioned Miami Hurricanes, 22-game winning streak, head coach by Larry Coker, quarterback Ken Dorsey, and they pretty much was a team loaded with not only future NFL stars, but just current college football players that were absolute household names to that point, especially if you were a college football fan back in 2002.
Yeah, just embarrassment of riches. And I kind of went in depth in terms of like a lot of the characters and the participants in the previous episode. A lot of these guys, such as Vilma, DJ Williams,
Yeah.
you had Dorsey, you had McGahee, you had Andre Johnson, Ed Reed. They were all holdovers from that 2001 team. Just insane. I mean, just a lot of talent. Not quite as the ridiculous embarrassment of riches as the previous season, but
Right.
still plenty of talent, and they were expected to repeat in resounding fashion, which we'll deal much more with as this episode progresses.
Now, one of the things that I really do remember about that Hurricanes team was that the amount, I'm not going to say criticism, because criticism is a strong word, but the one word that I would use is reluctancy of a lot of pro scouts looking at Ken Dorsey. Now, of course, at that time, University of Miami was just loaded with quarterback history going all the way back to Jim Kelly. You had Kozar, you had Steve Walsh, Erickson, Torretta, Testaverde. They had a bevy of quarterbacks. Then you had Ken Dorsey, who, unlike those quarterbacks, was more of a game manager. And as much as like to the point that you alluded to, was that they were just don't wreck the Ferrari type of thing with Ken Dorsey. Ken Dorsey was not going to win a game for you, but he sure as heck could lose one. And I think that was the kind of a reluctance that a lot of the NFL scouts had with him during that season. There was almost like this wait and see type of attitude that a lot of NFL scouts had with Ken Dorsey.
Yeah, he was just a player where a lot of times, most instances, the film don't lie. And a lot of times, like
Right.
sometimes, the film and things like that can't, and combine can't measure things such as intangibles and leadership qualities and devotion and things like that. But although those attributes are highly sought after and very, very important, is usually very, very essential in conjunction with elite arm talent,
Right.
where he was off the charts in the intangible area, but he didn't quite have the arm talent. He didn't have the mobility. This was still the era of college football where, this was before the spread offense really took off under what's the guy's name? Urban Meyer.
Yeah.
So, this was still the time where you had the prototype pocket passer. He didn't have to be able to make plays with his feet off schedule, by time, et cetera, et cetera. So, and
Right.
then also to your point, with his bevy of talent, very rarely did he have to do so because, 10 pretty much every week at the other 10 positions, he had the matchup advantage across the board each and
Right.
every week for the most
Right.
part, except for when they play someone like Florida State or someone like that.
Right.
So it was a lot of, in addition to his lack of arm talent, it was a lot of things, and rightfully so, that scouts were like, well, he's kind of gravy training. It's not really that good. He's just, anybody could win with that team and so forth. And to a degree, in my opinion, a lot of those assessments were just.
Right. The number two ranked team was Oklahoma, coached by Bob Stoops. Quarterback, they split. They had two quarterbacks. They had Nate Hibble and Jason White. The running back, very underrated running back, in my opinion, was Quentin Griffin. When he was at Oklahoma, those who don't remember him, he was somewhat on the smaller side, but very fast, very quick. Played a little while in the NFL. I think most notably with the Broncos. Yeah, wide receiver Mark Clayton had a lot of great years in Baltimore. Andre Woolfolk at cornerback and linebacker Teddy Lehman. Oklahoma was a very, very solid team, and one of those programs that you saw was on the rise. As far as like being a national power once again. They had a few down years during the 1990s, right after Barry Switzer left. They had a few down years, and then Bob Stoops comes in, rebuilds the program, and here they are right back in the top 25.
Oh yeah, and then remember they won the national title over Chris Rankin, Florida State in
Yeah.
2000. Remember, and
Yes.
that was the
Yes.
game in which they kind of got fortunate a little bit because remember Miami had beaten Florida State that season, and
Yeah.
despite beating them that year, Florida State got the BCS championship bid over them, and and they were able to beat Florida State because I think Miami would have throttled them as well. And Jason White, he was a very, very solid quarterback. And to your point, Bob Stoops was beginning to turn in, like perennial 10-win seasons, perennial Big 12 championship contention, as well as perennial national championship contention on a regular basis.
Okay. Number three was Florida State, coached by Bobby Bowden. They were the number three ranked team in the country when the season started. During that year, Coach Bowden passed Bear Bryant on the all-time coaching list. He retired number two behind Joe Paterno. in coaching, career coaching wins. Key players on that team: Anquan Bolden at wide receiver, Michael Bulwell linebacker, and Cameron Wembley at defensive end. This was a team that didn't really have the offensive firepower that Miami had, but at the same time, it's Florida State, and you knew that that team up there in Tallahassee was going to give the Canes problems where they meet, because this was back when all of the Florida teams played each other during the year. You don't necessarily see that anymore, but this was when they used to play each other every year, each other, and these games were must-see TV every time they hit the field. And this is Bobby Bowden. Bobby Bowden had won the national championship a few years earlier, and they still one of the top programs in the country.
Correct. And now, in my opinion, I think this was the team that was kind of living off past reputation and past success.
I agree.
Because
this Florida State team definitely was.
Yes, and case in point, like I just mentioned, in 2000, they got that BCS bid over Miami, despite the fact that they had lost to them that year. And so I think they were getting a lot of, like, even the preseason rankings, because you remember they had lost the championship game to I just said it. They had lost the championship game to Oklahoma in 2000. They beat Virginia Tech the year before, if I'm not mistaken.
Against Michael Vick, yeah.
But then remember they lost the 97. I think that was the inaugural BCS championship game to T. Martin, Tennessee.
Yes.
And they lost that game. So it was kind of like they had began to show the reputation for, even though they always would get the big game based on past reputation, that they wouldn't deliver the goods, so to speak, but they were still living off past rep and past accomplishments.
Number 5, and you just mentioned the fifth ranked team that year, the University of Tennessee, head coach Phil Fulmer. Casey Causton was the quarterback. His favorite target was tight end, and I forgot he went here. Jason Witten, the future Cowboy tight end, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame, if he's not already. But yeah, I mean, Tennessee, SEC team, this was right at the beginning of the SEC becoming the SEC. Alabama that year was on probation, so they couldn't play in a bowl game. LSU was starting to come around. Nick Saban was, I think, in the second or third year at LSU. So things were starting to kind of turn around for LSU. Florida was still Florida, but they were undergoing some changes because this was the first year of the Ron Zook era. Steve Spurrier had left to go coach in the NFL. So this was sort of like the real beginning of the SEC coming into the forefront. And we're going to talk more about the conferences in a bit. But there were a number of key games during the year that we're going to touch on real quick. And I think that some of these were classics, but at the same time, kind of, not so much. The regular season was somewhat anticlimactic. As far as there wasn't a lot of major upsets from what I could tell. Week 2, the first real test for the Miami Hurricanes came against number 6 Florida. Once again, like I said, it was the first year of the Ron Zook era in Florida. Florida had quarterback by the name of Rex Grossman, and Miami beat up on Florida in Gainesville 41-16 in that game. But it was that game, again, very anticlimactic. Week 3, September 14th. And we're going to talk more about this Ohio State team, but they were like one of these teams that just kind of laid in the weeds all year long, and nobody really paid attention to them until late in the season. But this is the beginning of it, when Ohio State started to come around. Ohio State, number 6 at this time in week 3, defeated Washington State in Columbus 25-7. Jason Gesser at the beginning of the year was one of the favorites to win the Heisman. out of Washington State. He was the next in line of those great Washington State quarterbacks, where you had at the beginning you had Drew Bledsoe, and then followed by Ryan Leaf, and then he was the next in line, Jason Gesser, and the Cougars had a 7-6 lead. Going into halftime, it was on the verge of become of having pulling off a big upset in Columbus, but then this freshman running back from Youngstown, Ohio, named Maurice Clarett. That was the first time anybody had heard of this kid. Finished with 144 yards in the second half, finishing with 230 yards on the ground. The sixth best rushing total in Buckeye history, 9 yards shy of the all-time freshman record, held by one Archie Griffin. So this is the game that put Maurice Clarett on the map. That Ohio State team, like I said before, was kind of laying in the weeds all year long. Do you agree with that statement?
I agree with that statement. They were just kind of laying in the weeds all year long, and then it was kind of like Jim Tressel. They were a team that was not the most talented team, but they were extremely well coached because Jim Tressel was an excellent coach. But they typically did not beat themselves, and they couldn't afford to because
No.
not trying to be derogatory in any way. They had a total bum at quarterback, Craig Kinsel. He was just a bum, so they couldn't afford to not, to beat themselves and all of that. But I think due to the fact that their offense wasn't very explosive, they didn't always win impressively and so forth, that they were kind of overlooked as a result. So I think your assessment of them being laying in the weeds and laying in the cut a little bit is quite accurate.
Week 4, Florida blasted Tennessee 30-13 in Knoxville. Rex Grossman passed for 324 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. Week 7 was a huge week in college football. 3 top 10 matchups. First one, Florida State at Miami. Final score, Miami 28, Florida State 27. And this was the game that I think a lot of people really started to see some chinks in the armor when it came down to the Hurricanes, because the Seminoles kept with them pretty much all game long. And once again, it came down to a last-second field goal. And instead of it going wide right, as it normally does for Bobby Bowden, this time it went wide left. And once again, Florida State victimized by a last-second missed field goal. Ken Dorsey in that game, 362 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, but he did have 2 picks. So again, not to hate on Ken Dorsey, but it was a decent game. It was a very pedestrian game considering what you have weapon-wise on the outside and what you have in the backfield with Willis McGahee. But still, you have the talent advantage, and you only win against your in-state rival at home in the Orange Bowl, by only 1. And it came down to a last-second missed field goal.
Okay, well, devil's advocate right fast, because I think to your degree, to your point, I think there certainly were some chinks in the armor to a degree, but as we acknowledged earlier, they were not nearly as strong as nor complete as the 2001 edition. But do you think, as a result of them being the defending champs, as well as the preseason #1, as well as Ken Dorsey being the Heisman favorite and so forth, that they were kind of getting everyone's best shot?
Yeah, and you could definitely say that, especially with when you have Miami playing at home against Florida State. That is a rivalry, national television audience, obviously. Watching that game, a lot of interest from around the country on that game, and you're going to get everybody's best shot. It's clear, especially from your in-state rival, Miami. And that is Miami's chief rival. You could say about anything. You could say Florida. You could say Notre Dame as probably their biggest rival. But no, their biggest rival is Florida State. And you could best believe that Bobby Bowden and all those guys, Bull Ware, and all those guys, Cameron Wembley, Anquan Bolden, they were all ready for that game. They all were. But again, came down to last second missed field goal. Once again, Bobby Bowden being denied at the Orange Bowl again.
Yes, very close game, and it's just like they just could not get the kick right. What you figure that the kicking game probably cost them? I know at least three times.
Yeah.
It cost them at least three times.
Yeah,
And it
Ride
just
White won, Ride White two, and then this one wide left. And I remember
yeah.
Keith Jackson being absolutely beside himself. He missed it to the left, at the end of that game. And I remember watching that game, and I was just saying to myself, Miami got more luck than sense. They are so lucky because from what I remember of that game, Florida State outplayed them. But it was just a lot of costly penalties and a lot of costly turnovers that the Hurricanes just kind of benefited from. And of course, we'll see in the championship game that kind of comes back to haunt the Hurricanes in a bit. Another game that very same day was the annual Red River Shootout, number 2 Oklahoma against number 3 Texas in the Cotton Bowl. Oklahoma scores 21 points in the fourth quarter to beat Texas. Quentin Griffin, the aforementioned Quentin Griffin, check out these numbers: 32 carries, 248 yards on the ground with 2 touchdowns.
Bell cow.
Yeah, exactly. Quentin Griffin was something else at Oklahoma, and he's one of those really, really good running backs that a lot of people don't really remember, because his pro career didn't live up to the expectations that he had with the numbers that he put up in Norman, but still, great game. Texas once again denied in the Cotton Bowl, the Red River Shootout. This time again to Oklahoma and now to Bob Stoops. Another game later on that same day, that night, Tennessee losing to number 6 Georgia in Athens, right up the street from where I live. 18-13, Georgia was on its way to the SEC title and a Sugar Bowl appearance. Then Oklahoma continues its winning ways against Ohio, beating Iowa State, making the top 10 for the first time in like forever, and they get smacked around 49-3. Then in week 13, the game. This is the point in the season where you started having the 2 polls, when you had the regular AP poll and then the BCS poll. And Ohio State comes into their game against Michigan on week 13. The number 2 ranked, they've jumped all the way up to number 2. And they're also the number 2 ranked team in the BCS, taking on the Michigan Wolverines in a very low-scoring, typical Big Ten low-scoring game. Ohio State wins 14-9, concluding an undefeated season. Okay, Maurice Clarett, 20 carries, 119 yards, and 1 touchdown. Craig Krenzel, your guy, 10-14 for 124 yards passing. Okay, Ohio State gets Michigan again, but this time they conclude an undefeated season, and the solidified their ranking at number 2 in the country, which sets up the collision course between them and Miami in the Fiesta Bowl, the designated BCS national championship game, because back then that's what they designated certain bowl games as being the national championship game. So that year it was the Fiesta Bowl.
Yes, and they concluded the season, beating Michigan as you stated, and all of that, and then just on to that, and then conventional wisdom had it that not getting too far ahead of ourselves, but conventional wisdom had it that they would not mount much of a challenge because they were, as I mentioned before, they were kind of limited offensively at the quarterback position, and then even though they had Maurice Clarett, he wasn't the most explosive back. He was a good back. He was a physical back. But he wasn't the most explosive back.
And was a freshman. And was a freshman. You had other top rear, Quinn Griffey. You had Larry Johnson from Penn State who would put up big numbers. You know, in fact, Larry Johnson, the running back from Penn State, had the most rushing yards in the Big Ten that year. He had over 2,000 yards rushing, you know, for the Nittany Lions. You know, so you had, you know, and this was like the really last hurrah of like the Big Ten being top to bottom, maybe the best conference in the country. You know, overall from top to bottom, the best conference. Yeah, you had Miami. Miami was in the Big East. You know, you had them. Maybe you hear a little something from West Virginia, but that's about it. The ACC, yeah, you had Florida State, but then that's all you had really. The ACC was living off of basketball. The SEC, you know, Alabama was on probation. Georgia meant to, you know, Georgia was good. Florida was still, it was kind of like wasn't the same with Steve Spurrier. So it was, so this is something, this season was somewhat of the changing of the guard, so to speak. And another team that we said earlier that was kind of like part of that changing of the guard was USC, putting up 44 points on Notre Dame on week 14. USC, number 6 in the country, number 6 in the BCS, in the Coliseum, blasting Notre Dame 44-13. Carson Palmer, 425 yards passing. Running back Justin Fargas. Remember that name? Justin Fargas.
Wow, way back.
Justin Fargas was the running back. He, of course, he played for the Raiders. He's the son of the actor Antonio Fargas, Huggy Bear from Starsky and Hutch. 20 carries for 120 yards in that game. Mike Williams, receiver, 10 catches for 169 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that set up, you know, a really interesting bowl season coming up. And we're going to talk about the bowls real quick. But before that, the BCS matchups that was set up, the Rose Bowl, you had Oklahoma playing Washington State in the Rose Bowl. The Sugar Bowl was going to be Georgia playing against Florida State. And then in the Orange Bowl, you had USC taking on Iowa. And of course, in the Fiesta Bowl for the national championship on January 3rd, Ohio State against the University of Miami in the Fiesta Bowl in Tempe, Arizona. They hadn't quite moved to Glendale yet, but this is still at Tempe, still at Sun Devil Stadium.
Okay. Question.
Yeah.
College at this time, more than any other sport, college at that time was about when you lost.
Yes.
As opposed to losing. And I only say that to say that you could make a very, very strong argument that year that in terms of level of play by the end of the season, you could make a very, very, very strong case that probably USC was probably one of the 2 best teams based on level of play by the end of the season. But then unfortunately, they had a pedestrian start before they kind of, because what were they? They started out 3-2 before they kind of found their bearings and kind of ran off 8 straight wins. And it just seems like as they progressed through the 8-game winning streak, that they became more and more dominant, more and more complete.
Yeah, it was during that time, it was more along the lines of when you lost than as opposed to who you lost to. Okay, who you lost to was still very significant, you know, as it kind of is today. But back then, if you lost, say, at the beginning of the year to a ranked opponent, okay, you still had a legitimate shot at that. If you ran the table, that you would get some love from the voters and by some of the voters that, hey, you know, it was like you coming into the bowl season, like you're like red hot or whatever. Who cared that you lost that game to Arkansas, you know, to start the season? You know what I'm saying? It's a, you know, you lost to Arkansas at the beginning of the year. It probably was in Fayetteville. Okay, fine. Let's move on. But fine. But at the end of the year, here we are in November going into December, and you've won all the rest of your games. So that's when that kind of, at that time, that was more in play than anything. Now, if you lost at the beginning of the year to, say, San Jose State, you know, no, I mean, not casting any shade to San Jose State, but if you lost to like a lower seeded team or like an Eastern Michigan, then okay, the pollsters may be kind of like looking at you side-eyed, like, okay, like what happened there? But still, they would give you some love that it might have been at the beginning of the year, and it kind of may excuse that, But if you lost like in conference play, the second to last game of the regular season, that could drop you completely out of the top 10. And you could have been a top 10 team all year. And instead of you playing like in a BCS game, you could end up playing in the Humanitarian Bowl or something, just because of that one loss. And that was more along the lines of that's the way it was back in those days, back in the early 2000s.
Yes, and I agree because they started out 3-2, and then two of their losses was at Kansas State. They lost that by 7, and then secondly they lost to Washington State, as we mentioned before. They had gotten as high as number 10 in the nation that year. They lost to them at Washington State by 3, and
Yeah.
so not bad losses. And then it just seems like they, as I mentioned before, they found their bearings. They started out preseason number 20, so they didn't have high expectations in terms of national championship contention. But it just seems like they just really bought into what Pete Carroll was doing and just got better and better as the season progressed. And then even though they didn't hit pay dirt that year, it kind of was a catalyst to kind of spring them forward, to your point that you made a few minutes earlier, into that mini dynasty that they had in the following few years.
Now, looking at the conference standings and the teams that won their conferences or whatever, Florida State won the ACC with a record of 7-1 in conference, 9-5 overall. The Big 12, they had 2 divisions in the Big 12. Colorado won the North Division of the Big 12, going 9-5 and 7-1 in conference. They finished the year at number 20. They were followed by K-State, Kansas State with 11-2. Shout out to Bill Snyder. 11-2 overall, 6-2 in conference. And of course, they go by conference record. Even though Kansas had a better overall record, Colorado had a better record than them in conference by 1 game. In the South Division, Oklahoma, 12-2 overall, 6-2 in conference. They're followed by 11-2 Texas, 6-2 in conference. And so those two, so Oklahoma ended up beating Colorado in the Big 12 championship game that year, 29-7. Over in the Big East, Miami, of course, ran away with that one, 7-0 in conference, 12-0 regular season. West Virginia, who was the number finished right at the 25th ranked team in the AP poll, they finished 9-4, followed by the University of Pittsburgh with my man Larry Fitzgerald. They were 9-4 in conference. They were 9-4 overall, 5-2 in conference, and then Virginia Tech 10-4 overall, 3-4 in conference. Okay, moving on to the Big Ten. Ohio State undefeated. They finished the year 14-0, 8-0 in conference, followed by Iowa 11-2, 8-0 in conference. Then Michigan 10-3, 6-2 in conference, and then Penn State 9-4. 5-3 in conference. Penn State finished the season 16th ranked. Conference USA, which I've always considered the crazy conference, the conference of everybody. Cincinnati won that one with a record of 7-7 overall, but 6-2 in conference, followed by TCU at 10-2, but they were also 6-2 in conference, but Cincinnati won the head-to-head. Okay, the Mid-American Conference in the East, that was won by Marshall, 11-2, 7-1 in conference. Quarterback, of course, Byron Leftwich. In the Western Division, which was won by Toledo, 9-5 overall, 7-1 in conference. Okay, and then the Mountain West, Colorado State won the conference for the first time in like forever, winning 10-4 record, 6-1 in conference. The Pac-10 was actually won by Washington State at 10-3, 7-1 in conference, followed by 7-1 USC, 11-2 overall. And then finally, in the Southeastern Conference, Georgia won the Eastern Division at 13-1, 7-1 in conference. And then the Western Division champs was the aforementioned University of Arkansas. I just put that out of my butt. But Arkansas won the Western Division, 9-5 overall, 5-3 in conference. LSU finished 8-5. but Auburn finished second in the West, 9-4 overall, 5-3 in conference. So there you have it. And oh, by the way, in the conference championship game in the SEC, Georgia blasted Arkansas 30-3 in the Georgia Dome. And there you have it. That's the conference finals. Those are the conference winners for 2002. Now moving on to the bowl games.
Now, before we move on to the bowl games, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
listeners, just put a bookmark in because we're going to get to it. We have to talk about one of the wackiest plays that occurred in 2002, and both of us being Louisiana alums, I know you remember this. We got to talk about very briefly the Bluegrass Miracle that happened on
absolutely, absolutely. And
November
I
9,
remember.
2002.
Do you
Yes, go
remember?
ahead.
Before you go, do you remember where you were when you're watching the game? I know you do. I know you remember where you were.
I was I was sitting in my I was sitting in my living room. I was sitting in my living room watching it, and LSU was up by 10 with 14 to go. And then Kentucky came storming back. They took the lead with 11 seconds left. They kicked the ball off, and the guy didn't return it for nothing. I jumped in my truck. You remember my old S10? I
Yes.
jumped in my truck like, forget it, the game is over and all of that. But then I'm riding down the street. I put it on the AM dial. Now this is a name from way back. Old voice of the former voice of the Tigers, Jim Harthorne.
Jim
You
Hawthorne,
know,
you're righty.
uh,
Jim
yeah.
Hawthorne, yep.
And they say, well, we're gonna go ahead. They already started talking about the next week game. I think they had Alabama next or something. This is just a disappointing loss and all that. And he like, well, the final play to round it out. Marcus Rounder drops back to pass. He's gonna throw it as far as he can because they was on their own 26.
Yeah.
And he threw it, and then next thing you know, is a tip, and then he say, and then you're like, what the hell? I damn near ran off the road that day because it was like, what the hell? He caught it, and they stole the game. And then when I got back home to watch the highlights, they had. You remember the Lexington fans had began to storm the field.
Yes.
They had thrown
The Gatorade on Guy Morris, yeah.
Yeah, and then he catches it and runs it in as the fans are trying to run back off the field in celebration, and LSU wins, Kentucky loses.
See,
Where were you?
I'll never forget this. This is right before 2002. Me and Nikki had just started dating. We had been dating for about a year, right? And Nikki, who is my wife, we had started dating in that January, and we were still dating. And her son, my stepson, I think he had a football game that day, but it was that morning. Okay, so the game was over. I came home. I wasn't really planning on doing anything. I was just hanging out at her apartment. And from what I remember, I had something to do for work later that day or that night. So I was like, so I had to leave for whatever reason. I don't remember exactly what the reason was. So the LSU game was on, obviously, and I'm sitting there watching it, and I'm saying to myself, how could LSU lose to Kentucky?
In football.
Yeah, how could they lose to Kentucky? Kentucky hasn't been good in years in football. But here it is, and I remember when they scored, I'm like, LSU gonna actually lose to Kentucky. They're actually gonna lose. And I'm sitting there and I'm gonna just sit here and watch what happens. You never know. I was so tempted to get up, and I just didn't. But I sat down and said, let me just see what happens. Marcus Randall drops back the pass. The fans were all on the field and everything. I was like, this is going to be the biggest win in Kentucky football in decades, going back to the Patrick Ramsey days of the 70s, maybe. What is going to happen? But you saw the fans all around the field. They threw the Gatorade on head coach Guy Morris. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's over. Marcus Randall dropped back the pass. Of course, the brother of former Southern University quarterback, the younger brother.
Eric,
Yeah,
Eric Randall.
Eric
Yes.
Randall.
Who
And
should be the next Southern University coach, by the way. But
yeah,
anyway, next.
anyway, Randall throws the ball down the field. I was like, there's no way in the world that he's going to reach the end zone. It's either going to get knocked down, or maybe LSU player might catch it, but he's going to get tackled. They're too far away. They throw the ball's tipped in the air. Devery Henderson comes literally out of nowhere and catches it. I literally fell on the floor as he crossed the goal line. I was like, are you kidding me? You know,
Because that ball was tipped at about give or take the 15 or the 20.
yes,
And
I think
when
around
he
the
came out
20.
of nowhere to catch it,
He
he
still had
still
to
had
go.
to run like 15 yards to
Yeah,
get
and
home.
everybody was just standing around like, okay, in shock. All of the Kentucky players were like looking at like, what's this? And he crosses the goal line. The LSU bench just runs into the end zone with Devery Henderson, congratulating him, dogpiling and everything. And and it was so funny. Like right before the play started, it's like they dunked the Gatorade on the Kentucky coach, and I'm thinking, oh, bro, that's a bad omen. I said that might be a bad omen. I was just thinking that, but I was like, nah, Kentucky got
Right.
this. Sure enough, it was a bad omen as LSU scores on the blue was known forever the Bluegrass Miracle, and it was like one of those games that you think is over. Now we're recording this the same day as what happened earlier this afternoon between the Bears and the Bengals in one of the wildest games I had ever seen. The Bears pretty much the Bengals pretty much scored on the last possession. Bears had no time left. They're just trying to get in the field goal range. Sure doesn't throw a pass over the middle. Bears tight end catches it and it runs it 60-some yards for a touchdown. The same look that those Bengal players had this afternoon against the Bears was the same look that those Kentucky Wildcat players and fans had as Devery Henderson crossed the goal line for that touchdown. It was like a feeling of hopelessness. It was like a look of what the hell happened, mixed in with I can't believe we let this happen type of look. You know what I mean? It's a look that more than that as fans, it's like it will make you basically just renounce your fandom of a team.
Yes.
It was that deep of a hurt that you saw in those fans and everybody that was associated with Kentucky football.
Yeah, and as my father used to say that particular day, LSU was lucky enough to crap in a swinging jug. And, so, so you got to be lucky. You got to be lucky because the chances of you pulling that off are nil and none,
Yes.
crapping into a swinging jug, Anyway, so.
Chuck, I have not heard that saying in like forever. Not since I lived in Louisiana. I've heard that saying. Good God, that's a good one though. It's true. It's true. And your dad has always known for those sayings. I tell you, your dad was always known for that. Okay, the bowl season that year, 28 bowl games that year. Which, according to now, is like what now 100 now? Everybody's bowl eligible, but really, I think it's now 36.
Almost. Probably like 35.
I think it's 35 now.
Or something.
I think it's 35 now. The first one, the New Orleans Bowl, North Texas beat Cincinnati 24-16. The GMA, which was on December 17th, December 18th, the GMAC Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. Marshall, behind MVP Byron Leftwich, defeated Louisville 38-15. In the Tangerine Bowl in Orlando, Texas Tech behind MVP quarterback Cliff Kingsbury beats Clemson beats Clemson 55-15. Kingsbury in that game 32 of 43, 375 yards and 3 touchdowns. It was the first bowl win for the Red Raiders since 1995. On Christmas Day, the Las Vegas Bowl, UCLA defeats New Mexico 27-13, and then later that night in the Hawaii Bowl, Tulane, the Tulane Green Wave beats Hawaii 36-28, led by J.P. Lossman and MVP Mewelde Moore. They beat the
Ooh, those are
homestand.
two names that I
Yes.
haven't heard in a very long time. I remember J.P. Lossman was with the Bills, and then Manuel DeBoer. Me and my brother, Mac, they were kind of cool with each other a little bit when he
Okay.
used to play because my brother Mac is a big time Steeler fan, and Manuel DeBoer spent a few seasons with the Steelers in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's right. And not only he played for the Bears too, right?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. The Motor City Bowl on December 26th, the first ever Motor City Bowl to be played at Ford Field. Boston College 51, Toledo 25. Okay, also on December 26th, the Insight Bowl in Phoenix at Bank One Ballpark, the home of the Arizona Diamondbacks. And I've never, and this an aside, I don't like it when they play a college bowl game in a baseball park. There's a reason why the NFL and other cities got away from building dual purpose stadiums. There's a reason for that. And I guess college football never figured that out. But playing a baseball, because it makes for weird dimensions, like weird situations and things of that nature. Like they played one year, they had a bowl game at Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg, with the home of the Tampa Bay Rays, which looked awful. It looked
Now,
awful.
now I know it's not a bowl game, but I will make one exception just in general. It's not a bowl game because obviously Chicago is too cold to have a bowl game. But I absolutely love when Northwestern have games at Wrigley Field. I absolutely love that.
See that's kind of different, especially with two historians like us, because the Bears played at Wrigley Field like for 1,000 years before they moved to Soldier Field, and there's something kind of romantic about a football game in at Wrigley, even though it does cause some safety concerns because the field is so snugged into Wrigley, and you have those brick walls on each side of the field of the end zones. That's kind of like a health risk, a safety risk, because
Correct.
last time I checked, bricks don't move. They don't give. If
They're
you're right,
undefeated for sure.
they don't they
Yeah.
don't give. But the Inside Bowl in Phoenix, Pitt beats Oregon State 38-13. Pitt led by future NFL stars quarterback Tyler Palko and wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald 5 catches for 88 yards and a touchdown. In the Houston Bowl at Reliance Stadium, Oklahoma State beats Southern Miss 23-13, 33-23, excuse me. Okay, one of my favorite bowl games, December 27th, the Independence Bowl in Shreveport. I've been watching the Independence Bowl since I was a kid, since I was small. If you remember, coming on the Mizzlou Sports Network.
You are going way back now.
Watching it on Mizzlou.
And that used to be with Tim Brando, right?
That's right.
Yeah, boy, is he still alive?
I
I
think
haven't
he
heard
is.
his name in a long time.
I think he is. I think he still does like college basketball for ESPN or something, but like some of the smaller. But yeah, the Independence Bowl on the Mizzlou Television Network. Out of Shreveport, Ole Miss beats Nebraska 27-23. Eli Manning, 313 yards passing and 1 touchdown, was named MVP for Ole Miss. Nebraska finishes the season 7-7, which was their first non-winning season in 40 years.
Wow, just dominance and just speaks to the excellence of was that when Solich was there? I think
That
Osborne
was like
gone by then.
that was
Frank
Solich.
Solich.
That was
Okay,
Frank Solich.
Okay, yes. Okay.
And of course, my other favorite, the Holiday Bowl, and of course, this was another barn burner. Kansas State 34, Arizona State 27. Came down to the final possession, as it always does in the Holiday Bowl. Tied at 27 with a minute 15 remaining. L. Robinson, quarterback of Kansas State, throws a game-winning touchdown pass to Derek Evans for the win. The arrive at the final score 34-27. Defensive MVP in that game won Terrell Suggs.
He's still a ball so hard university, baby.
Yep,
You know,
yep. The Continental Tire Bowl in Charlotte, now it's called the Belk Bowl. Virginia beats West Virginia 48-22. In the Alamo Bowl in San Antonio, Wisconsin 31, Colorado 28 in overtime. Mike Allen with a 37-yard field goal for Wisconsin in overtime for the win. On December 30th, the Music City Bowl in Nashville, Minnesota over Arkansas 29-14. The Seattle Bowl in Seattle at Quest Field, Wake Forest 34, Oregon 14. Do they even have the Seattle Bowl anymore? I haven't heard that in a long time.
your guess is good as mine. I couldn't tell you. Because me, even back then, um, unless I had a personal rooting interest, like all of the early bowl games, like on the 17th, 18th, those were the scrubs. I'm not watching. I'm not. I watch Barnaby Jones reruns before I watch that. Man, I'm not.
Well, you know me, if it's football and there's nothing else on, I'm tuning that on. Even if I'm got it on in the background noise, I'm gonna have it on. Going to New Year's Eve. That afternoon on the blue turf of Boise, the Humanitarian Bowl, Boise State 34, Iowa State 16. Another one of my favorite bowl games that I watch every year. The Sun Bowl in El Paso, Texas. Purdue over Washington 34-24. MVP of that game, Kyle Orton for Purdue, 25 of 37, 283 yards and a touchdown.
He was in the league a long time. Man. Years in the league. Yeah, very serviceable. He did some starting, but very solid backup for the most part.
Also on New Year's Eve, the Liberty Bowl in Memphis, TCU 17, Colorado State 3. The Silicon Valley Classic in San Jose, California, another bowl game that I don't think even exists anymore. Fresno State 30, Georgia Tech 21. The Peach Bowl in my neck of the woods in Atlanta, Maryland 30, Tennessee 3. Whatever happened to the Maryland football program? Or you haven't heard much from them in years. And you live in that neck of the woods.
I live about 15 minutes from UMD. Well, their problem was they didn't realize who they were. Like they had Ralph Friedgen, remember, where he would perennially win about 8 to 9 games a year. Every now and then, if the sun shined on their butt just right, they'll get to 10 wins. But then all of a sudden, they didn't know how good they had it. They fired him about 10 to 12 years ago, and they've been struggling ever since, and all of that. And I know they got, what's the guy name? He was Coach Lockey something from Alabama. He coached at Alabama, and he's a really, really good recruiter and all of that. So he brings in a lot of good classes, but similar to LSU, they haven't been able to lock down the talent in the DMV. And then also with the transfer portal now in football too, it's kind of, even if you can attract them, if you can't manage your attrition rate, what difference does it make?
Right.
So that's kind of where they're at right now.
Okay. And the final college football game in the 2002 calendar year, the San Francisco Bowl in San Francisco at AT&T Park, Virginia Tech 20, Air Force 13. Okay, moving on to January 1st, then these are the minor bowl games on January 1st, if you want to call them minor, being on New Year's Day. The Outback Bowl in Tampa, Michigan beats Florida 38-30. In the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Texas 35, LSU 20. In the Gator Bowl, in Jacksonville, North Carolina State 28, Notre Dame 6, MVP, my boy, Phillip Rivers, 23 of 37, 228 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yes.
Mr. Get It Done. He just gets it done. He just kind of with that old Bernie Kosar release. He kind of played like the reincarnation of Bernie Kosar a little bit
Yes.
with the sidearm delivery. And it doesn't look good, but he makes the reads and he makes the throws, and he was a great leader of his team. So what more could you ask for?
And one of the few quarterbacks that talk smack to the opposing quarterback on the other side of the field.
And soon to be first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't know about that, but he's better than Eli Manning for sure. Screw the Super Bowl. He was the better quarterback, in my opinion. So
and in the Capital One Bowl in Orlando, Auburn 13, Penn State 9. Now moving to the BCS games. In the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, Oklahoma defeated Washington State 34-14. In the Sugar Bowl, Georgia claims the Sugar Bowl title, beating Florida State in New Orleans 26-13. And in the Orange Bowl in Miami, USC crushes Iowa 38-17, which leads us to the number one versus number two, the Fiesta Bowl, Ohio State versus the University of Miami. And before we get into the particulars of this game, what did you remember according to the lead up to this game right here? What were some of the things that you remember about that?
well, the lead up was kind of would Ohio State be able to keep pace with Miami pretty much because as Miami was a very very explosive offense. Ohio State was more of a 3 yards in a cloud of dust team, and then you also know typically historically has kind of played the Big Ten throughout the last 30 years for sure until recently. That it seems like whenever they come kind of below the Mason-Dixon line and play those Southern teams, that speed disadvantage really becomes pronounced as well. And so they was wondering whether or not they would be able to handle Miami's speed. Their offense was not designed to play from behind. What if they got behind, with Hills would be able to keep pace? And then they were a prohibitive underdog. They were like plus 11 and a half, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And so it was pretty much that. What were your assessments? Similar to mine, or
It was very similar to yours. It was the fact that I kept thinking that Miami was, my whole argument was this. One, I love underdogs, and Ohio State was the prohibitive underdog. Did I think Ohio State was going to win? No. But what I really wanted was Ohio State to at least keep it close. If they got into the second half and the game was still kind of like within reach of Ohio State, then I was happy. The last thing in the world I wanted was like a replay of Nebraska, Florida in the Fiesta Bowl a few years earlier when the game was essentially over by halftime. But what I really was hoping for, I was just hoping for a close game. And then you had two, like you said, two contrasting styles. You had the speed and the skill position players of the University of Miami against the ground and pound, tough defense, strong running attack of the University of Ohio State University. But at the same time, Ohio State had a couple of really good receivers. The question is, could Krizzle get it to him? And was he able to get it to him with those great defensive backs that the University of Miami had in 2002? That was the big question. Could Ohio State even keep it close? Because I've always believed that if you keep the game close, especially to a team that is a prohibitive favorite, and if you're close, they tend to start to get a little antsy and start to press. And one thing that the University of Miami, I've known over the years, that if they get into a close game in a game in which they should win, they start to get impatient. And I really believe that if Ohio State could keep it close, that might happen, and maybe become a lot closer than people would expect. And that's the thing I was hoping for.
And to piggyback your point, even though they had the cited talent disadvantage as far as the all 22 is concerned,
Yeah.
they had a significant edge when it came to who had the headset. Tressel versus Larry Coker. So to your point, if they could manage to kind of keep that game close, not only would Miami begin to press, but then also the superiority of coaching acumen of Tressel would really begin to, possibly have a significant impact on the outcome of the game.
Now, before we get into the game, there's one major piece of information that I forgot to tell you about at the end of the regular season, and that was the Heisman. The Heisman Trophy, of course, was won by Carson Palmer, 242 first place votes. He finished the year 3,942 yards passing, 33 touchdowns against only 10 interceptions with a 149.1 Q quarterback rating. Finishing second. For the life of me, I don't remember anything about him. But he finished second. That's Brad Banks of Iowa, quarterback. 2,573 yards, 26 touchdowns against 5 interceptions in a Kirk Ferentz offense. He put up those numbers, and for the life of me, I have no recollection of him.
He was kind of like a Cordell Stewart slash type of player. He could do a little bit of everything. He could do some receiving, some returning.
Well, I'm a West Coast guy. I'm a Pac-10 West Coast guy, so I never really paid a lot of attention to Iowa.
So he did that, and then after he got out of the league, obviously this was still the days where if you wasn't the prototypical 6'3", 6'4" pocket passer,
he was kind of like on the short side, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was about 5'11", so he kind of as usual, as usual, they'll bring certain quarterbacks in to kind of play for other positions. Let me just put it that way. And he he tried to stick, and then he eventually went up to the Canadian Football League, where he had a solid career.
Okay, and the third one, Larry Johnson, from Penn State. Remember him with the Chiefs. Big Ten offensive player of the year. 2,087 yards rushing, 20 touchdowns. Led the Big Ten in rushing. Over Maurice Claret. One of the a typical Penn State running back into that same mode as a Kurt Warner or Kajana Carter type of guy, kind of a bruising running back until he gets into the open field, and then could really turn on the jets once he got into the open field.
Correct. He was a very good player. He was a very good player for a number of years with the Kansas City Chiefs. And you're talking about hierarchy. You remember, like, the Chiefs, they went from, what was it? They went from like Priest Holmes, Larry Johnson to come on, what's the guy's name? He won me the fantasy football championship. Jamal Charles.
Yeah.
And they've had a lot of great backs, and it's
going before that with Christian Okoye.
Yes, and then even Marcus Allen kind of filled in, like kind of had a career revival a little bit, as well as we mentioned a couple of episodes back when we were doing the Saints episode, Barry Word and Harvey Williams as well, and Kimball Anders.
Kimball Anders.
We mentioned him last
episode, right?
Episode,
right. If you really want to go old school, the late great Joe Delaney.
You're getting way back now. Now I have to point this out. I don't want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom. I don't want to be, but that year, he finished fourth, and Ken Dorsey finished fifth in Heisman ballot. And then once again, you remember my point last episode about how back then, if you were simply the quarterback of a winning team or a very successful team, that would lead to being placed on the Heisman ballot, regardless of how good you actually were. Right. And he, just looking at this team, like, he's not even the fifth best player. Just right quick, dude. D-line, Vince Wilfork. Linebackers, DJ Williams, Jonathan Vilma. The safety, It was Sean Taylor. Sean Taylor was the safety on that team. Antrell Roll. That's
Yep.
just the defense now. Then they also had Willis McGahee, Kelly Winslow Jr. They had Roscoe Parrish. They had Andre Johnson. Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like for real. Come on, man.
Yeah.
And I understand that the quarterback is the most visible on the team, but
Right.
still, it should be some fair merit involved in terms of being placed on that Heisman ballot.
And I think that now in college football, you see that. What you're talking about is geared towards that because you don't necessarily have like the really top teams, like for example, Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams won the Heisman Trophy. Last year, Travis Hunter won the Heisman Trophy, and neither one of those were anywhere near a national championship caliber team.
Correct.
You really don't see that anymore. As opposed to back then, I think it's more geared toward now merit or in some cases, like a lifetime achievement award is what it really used to be. If you really want to be really honest about it, because you saw guys that stayed in the team for 3, 4 years instead of then going to different places or even leaving early. Now is basically just on performance, as opposed to just being on a winning team. And if your team gets hot at the end of the year, and your team is playing for a national championship, then you're almost a shoe in for shoe in for the Heisman, even without like really putting up big numbers. You know, in this case,
Correct.
in this case with Carson Palmer, the numbers spoke for themselves, especially with a team. Of course, they're not playing for a national championship, but he was by far the best player in college football, arguably. And which was also kind of shocking to me back then is that they actually gave it to somebody who played on the West Coast. Usually the Heisman Trophy was geared towards players because sports writers back then were just lazy, and then you didn't have the social media presence, of course, back then as you do now. So a lot of sports writers didn't tune in and watch games on the West Coast. And guys putting up big numbers in LA or in Oregon or Washington, they just didn't. But there guys that put up big numbers back then, and they just didn't do that until Carson Palmer came around. Because I don't know if you could really go back and look, but that's not since between like from the mid '80s to like Carson Palmer in 2002, how many players that played on the West Coast won the Heisman? Most of it's either the Midwest or in the East.
For the most part, because right off the top of my head, I can only think of, prior to Carson Palmer, Ty Detmer at BYU. I guess you
And that
could
was a
consider that
lifetime
West
achievement
Coast, I
award, pretty
guess.
much. That
Yeah.
was a lifetime achievement award because he had been putting up numbers, And the year that Ty Detmer won it, it was like a big controversy because a lot of people figured that the Rockets should have won it instead of him.
Yeah, and then I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I can't
You had
really
Andre
immediately
Ware in
think of
90.
anyone
You had
else.
Andre Ware. You had Barry Sanders. A lot of it, once again, Midwest to the East Coast.
Yeah, correct. I agree with you on that.
you know. But moving on to the Fiesta Bowl, January 3rd, 2002, Tempe, Arizona, Sun Devil Stadium, Ohio State, number 2 versus Miami, number 1. Little background on the teams, as you four know. Miami comes in undefeated, defending national champs. By this point, Miami has been on a 34 game winning streak. And you mentioned the players that was on this team. You stole my thunder from me with that with Willis McGahee, Dorsey, Andre Johnson, Kellen Winslow, Jonathan Vilma, Antrell Roll, Roscoe Parrish, Sean Taylor, Vince Wilfork. I mean, these guys. I mean, that's pretty much an NFL roster, essentially, minus the quarterback.
Yes, and the coach.
Yeah, that season though, they had shown some kinks in the armor. Not only did they escape a 1 point win against Florida State, they also was nearly upset by, of all team, Rutgers. They trailed 17-14 to Rutgers at half. Okay. And Rutgers that year finished 1-11. They had a controversial pass interference play on that game that changed the course of the game. Had that counted, Rutgers would have gone up something like 28-27 or 21-8 or something like that, and they would have had full control of that game, and the game would have been on Ken Dorsey's back to win. But a controversial pass interference, we may have one in this game. And there was also talk about, like I said earlier, heading into the Fiesta Bowl, that Miami may not have been as strong as they were the year before, living off of their reputation. Okay. And a lot of the experts warned that Miami may win this game, but it may not be as dominant as people may expect. Okay. Meanwhile, you had Ohio State. They started the season at number 13 in the AP poll. Jim Tressel was in his second year as head coach and looking to win the school's first national championship, first overall consensus national championship since 1968. Back in the days of Woody Hayes, Rex Kern at quarterback, Jim Otis at running back, who had a long career in the NFL his own self, Ohio State had a very balanced power running attack and a dominant defense. And their leader on the offense, like we said before, Maurice Clarett, and freshman quarterback Craig Krenzel, and two really good wide receivers, Chris Gamble and Michael Jenkins. Two very good receivers who had both had long careers in the NFL.
Yeah, they're solid teams, and they both used to give me hell because if I remember correctly, Chris Gamble, he spent years and years with the Carolina Panthers, and
Oh yeah,
Michael Jenkins was a mainstay with the Atlanta Falcons for many
yes,
years. So giving my Saints all kind of fits and all of that. So yeah, so they had a really nice roster, and then they had like you said, complemented with the dominant defense and the power running game. But the question mark would be in the game, would two question marks, would Tressel's coaching be able to overcome some of the talent disadvantages and deficiencies, and would if need be, would Craig Krenzel be productive or even serviceable in the game to kind of put them in the game? Because you would have to assume that going into that game, the game plan for Miami would have to be to take away Maurice Clarett and
yep,
force the fortunes onto Kinzel's shoulders.
yeah. And the one thing that the Ohio State was looking at their schedule was that they were battle tested. They had won a lot of games by 7 points. They had won 6 games by 7 points or less. The last 3 games was by a total of 16 points. So they were in every game. So they were battle tested and they pulled games out. They needed a miracle finish against Purdue. They needed overtime to beat a 5-7 Illinois team, which could be a double-edged sword. Yeah, you won all of these close games, but you won them against teams that was not all that good either. So that could be a double-edged sword, so to speak, for Ohio State. Yeah, you won all these close games, but look who you beat. And that might have been like another question mark that, yeah, you're undefeated, but your strength of schedule may be a little bit, may not be all that great.
I agree with that. It could be not all that great, but the beautiful thing it is about college football is, the day of the game, we're here. Like,
Yeah,
even if I'm not, I don't have to be better than you. I just have to be better than you today.
yeah,
If I'm better than you today, I win. And like a lot of times, you and I, especially playing ball, we beat somebody. Well, y'all players again. We'll beat you again. Hey, bro, 5 people got up ahead of you. Maybe
yeah,
next time, brother. You know what I mean?
yep.
We beat you this time. You know what I mean? So yeah. So it's just down to who's going to execute better, who's going to play better that particular day.
6 days before the game, Ohio State had accused Miami of printing flyers, claiming back-to-back titles, and had planned a Hurricanes victory party after the game in Arizona. Now, that was like speculative. Did it really happen? Who knows? If I had to guess, of course, I got this from Wikipedia. So I kind of remember hearing something about that. And it wouldn't put it past me with the University of Miami. It just wouldn't put it past me with that
Well,
group.
it wouldn't put it past me neither. And to be honest with you, I always take all challenges seriously. But if I were on that Miami team and Craig Kinsel was on the other side, I might would have went to FedEx Kinko a few days early myself. Because you got to look at their team, and we're not losing to this dude. There's no way we're losing to this guy. Not underestimating him, but the guy can't play.
Right.
It's like, come on, we can't lose to this dude. But anyway, we
I mean,
prepared
that
ourselves
was,
to bubble.
and that was the thing, like Craig Krenzel, you know, you really think about it, when was the last time you had like a really good Ohio State quarterback before this point? You got to go all the way back to maybe Cornelius Johnson of the 70s. You have to go all the way back then, and
Lord, I'm trying to think. Bobby Hoeing was
all
okay.
right,
He was compared to Craig Kinsel, he was Johnny Unitas compared to Craig Kinsel, but
okay.
he was all right,
Yeah.
so
Like you got to go back to Cornelius Johnson or Rex Kern back in the Woody Hayes days, and basically Cornelius Johnson was basically the option. He only threw the ball like 5 times a game.
Okay. With a name like Cornelius, I got to confirm that had to be a brother, right?
Yep, it was.
I ain't never met a brother from another mother named Cornelius before. So, so okay, I just wanted to make sure, so.
Okay, first quarter, Miami got on the board first, 25-yard touchdown pass from Ken Dorsey to Roscoe Parrish. Gets on the board first, 7-0. Then Krenzel scored on a 2-yard touchdown run on 4th and 1 to tie the score at 7-7. Then after Ken Dorsey fumble, Ohio State capitalized with a 7-yard touchdown run by Claret, and Ohio State led 14-7. Now, at this point in the game, I'm saying to myself, okay, this is kind of like what I'm looking for. This is going to be a little bit more competitive than what a lot of people thought. This is going to be a little bit more to this, if they can keep up, if Ohio State can keep pace, because you sat there watching this game thinking there's going to come a time where Miami's going to explode. It's coming, and by this point I'm like, okay. And that was the score. That was the score at half, 14-7. The one thing that I remember, and I went back and watched this game, and the one thing that I've noticed while going back and watching this game a second time is penalties and missed opportunities for Miami. Miami, the first half, kind of played sloppy. They played like, not to say that they were scared, but it was almost like, let's just like a boxer in a fight, just waiting for the right moment to throw that one good hook, and they were just waiting for it, but at the same time, missing opportunities to do that. You know what I'm saying? They played kind of tentative, not to make the big mistake, knowing full well you have the superior team. What are you waiting for? You know what I'm saying? That's the vibe I got while watching the first half of this game.
Yeah, I got that vibe too. And then to your point, there's a lot of missed opportunities because I can recollect at least a handful of throws that
Yeah.
Dorsey had that would have been touchdowns had he either thrown the ball on time or on target. Like he missed a couple of deep balls, or it'd be a situation where he hit a guy on a crosser where he threw it behind the guy, not where he could continue advancing up the field. So instead of possibly having a big play, he only moves the chains instead as a result. So, like you were saying, they'll leave in between the penalties and all of that, and then not to mention the turnovers as well, which I'm sure you're going to get to. They wound up, Ohio State was +3 in the game. Like they had, Miami had, Ohio State had 2 turnovers. Miami had 5, and they had, two Dorsey turnovers along with 3 lost fumbles to boot. And I mean, it's pretty hard to, no matter your talent advantages, That's pretty difficult to overcome when you lay the ball on the ground that much.
Right. Speaking of fumbles, there was one key play in this game that I remember, and to this day, I'm like, how did this even happen? Krenzel completed in the third quarter after a Miami punt. Krenzel completed a 57-yard pass to Chris Gamble. Now, then Gamble had to pass. Krenzel had a pass intercepted by Sean Taylor later in the drive. But Sean Taylor fumbled it, running it back, and Clarett recovered it, which led to a Buckeyes field goal, extended their lead to 17-7. That was kind of like the game in a nutshell. You do what you're supposed to do. You intercept Krenzel, you bring it back, and then you fumble the football on the return. Trying to do a little bit too much, to try to throw that knockout punch. And you're behind. And instead of you going up possibly 14 going up, 14-10, you're now behind by 10, 17-7. So that was a big, big turnover, a big fumble by Sean Taylor, the late great Sean Taylor.
Yes, and he's kind of like, but players like the incumbent, the predecessor rather, Ed Reed, you kind of sometimes got to live with those types
Yeah.
of mistakes sometimes because they make so many plays that you want the ball in their hands, and sometimes it does come back to bite you in the butt. And then you also have to also credit the Buckeyes in that instance because like a lot of times when they have to transition from offense to have to tackle someone, a lot of times offensive teams do not work on pursuit angles, pursuing the ball, tackling. So a lot of
Right.
times teams, the more explosive teams, can really get a lot of big plays on fumble and interception returns. But they buckled down and hustled back and kind of forced that fumble and got the ball back. They didn't quit on the play. So kudos to them as well.
The next came possession. Now, I will always contend this. Had Miami ended up winning this game. Now, I'm going to put it to you. I'm going to form it a question. If Miami won this game, who do you think should have been MVP?
Oh boy. I mean, probably. I remember Kellen Winslow Jr. having a couple of huge plays in that game.
He would have been MVP. Hands
Yes.
down, would have been MVP. Because
I remember
his second
touchdown he
half,
had that game.
because hands down, the second half that he had, nobody for Ohio State could stop him. Nobody could. Every time Dorsey dropped back to pass, he would throw it to Winslow. Winslow wasn't open. He was wide open. Whoever was guarding or who was, I don't know what kind of zone that they were playing, that zone or whatever defense did not account for Kellen Winslow Jr. at all. He became even bigger in the fourth quarter with what happened. But on the next Canes possession, still in the third, Kellen Winslow Jr., 23-yard reception, and then another 7-yard reception, which led to a 9-yard touchdown run by Willis McGahee to cut the Buckeye lead to 17-14. Then at the fourth quarter, Willis McGahee, hit by Will Allen, the cornerback of the Ohio State Buckeyes, knee injury, ruptured 3 ligaments in his knee, and that eventually led to a missed field goal by Miami. That kind of took the air out of Miami when Willis McGahee got hurt. Because I remember when McGahee got hurt and how gruesome that injury was. Not only were they concerned about, okay, will Miami win this game, but greater concern was, how is that going to affect his draft stock? Because that knee injury was a bad injury, rupturing 3 ligaments in his knee.
And looking back at it, man, because me, I don't like football now because they over-regulate the hitting. You can't hit as much now. But that was well, I'm on the airwaves, so how can I say this properly? That was a sucker move. I can connect because he dove straight into that dude knees,
He
man.
did. He did.
He just
did.
dove straight
That
into
was
that guy's knees, man.
that would have been, that would have been a penalty today in college sports. That would have been a penalty. And it was like when you saw it, it's like, yeah, he was aiming for his knee. He really was,
And it's not necessarily not that it would be penalized, but it's a lot of times it's things that may not necessarily be against the rules when it comes to anything, not just sports, right?
It may not be against
You
the
just
rules,
don't
but it's
do
just
it.
it's just
You just
not
don't
right.
do it.
Right. It's just not right.
You don't do it.
Now I have to go back and look at it. Was he blocked? Was he falling? Was Will Allen falling? Or did he just actually just dive into the guy's knee?
He kind of got blocked. He dove straight into that man's legs, man. He just, and it was just like, man, come on, dude. You don't do that. And like you said, that did kind of take the air out of it, and it is kind of hard, especially one of your brothers, a guy that you probably, they have a lot of relationships on the team.
And was a Heisman Trophy
finalist.
finalist. He was a Heisman
Correct.
Trophy finalist.
And not just what he would be missing from his talent perspective, but you look at that and the man is going to the league. He probably at that time, that's when it was still high emphasis and premium on the running back position.
Yes,
so
indeed.
he was definitely going to be a top 5 pick. And then to see all of that go and smoke, then if you want his teammates, you're just like, yeah, it would take the air out of your the wind out of your sails a little bit. You have to kind of regain your composure a little bit. And to your point, I think that's kind of what happened. It took the wind out of their sails for a spell.
Okay, let the missed field goal. Okay, the next Buckeyes possession, the same thing happened to them. They drive down the field, they tried a field goal, and they missed. The next came possession, Dorsey passed to Roscoe Parrish and gained 34 yards and then fumbled and recovered by Will Allen. Ohio State took over. Another turnover. And the game came down to 3 seconds left in regulation. Todd Stevens kicked a 40-yard field goal to tie the game at 17 to send it into overtime. Now, in the overtime period, Dorsey to Winslow Jr. 7-yard touchdown to give Miami the lead 24-17. At this point, I thought there's no way Ohio State will come back down and score. I was like, this is over. It's over. It was like, I was like, this is what I wanted. Overtime game. Miami scores first. Okay, fine. They did that national champs again. But go ahead.
I was going to say, and to boot, that 7-yard touchdown to from Dorsey to Winslow, he threw the ball totally behind him in the end zone.
Yes,
and he had to make a ridiculous adjustment to the
ball. That's right.
Just to catch it, and he still got both feet in bounds, just like his daddy used to do. You know, and it's kind of sad watching this game. I know we got to get to the game. It's kind of sad watching this game because you look at it like, even though, the sky's the limit for Winslow Jr., like he was every bit the pedigree and the embodiment of his father, the great first ballot Hall of Famer, Kellen Winslow. And then to see how things wind up going for him is kind of tragic. There's a lot of tragedies in this game.
You think of Kellen Winslow Jr., and I made the point that he was going. I totally believed that he was going to be one of those rare situations in sports where the son was better than the father, and the father was a Hall of Famer. That was one of those rare instances I really believed, because Kellen Winslow Sr., as much of a Charger fan I am, and Kellen Winslow was one of my all-time favorite players, the one thing his son had over him was that he was not afraid of contact.
Correct.
He was not afraid of contact. When Kellen Winslow Sr. came to the Chargers in the late 70s, I don't know if you knew this or not, but that was a nickname defenders used to give Kellen Winslow Sr. And now they used to call him the San Diego Chicken because he was afraid of contact.
Just like the old San Diego Chicken mascot?
Yes,
wow.
They used to call Kellen Winslow the San Diego Chicken because he did not like contact. He was a horrible blocker for a tight end, which is the reason why Don Coryell and his offensive coordinator, a man named Joe Gibbs, moved him out. moved him out away from the line so that he can get, because he tried to get off the line of scrimmage to run a pass route. He never got off the line of scrimmage.
Lord
That's
have
why they
mercy.
moved him out. It was basically because of necessity, because he was just the most athletic tight end they had ever seen. And Kellen Winslow Jr. was a much better blocker, loved contact. Matter of fact, got stronger after contact. If you
Every bit
watched
is
it,
explosive.
yes, and I really believe that Kellen Winslow Jr. was going to be a better tight end than his dad was, but unfortunately, things happened. Let's just keep it at
Yeah.
that. Just things happened,
Yeah.
with him.
Yes.
So this is overtime. Miami just scored 24-17. I'm thinking it's over, but 4th and 14. Okay, I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is over with now. But Krenzel, 17-yard pass to Chris Gamble to the Miami 12. Few plays later, 4th and 3. Krenzel threw a pass to Gamble in the corner of the end zone. The ball bounced off Gamble's hand for an incompletion. Miami starts to celebrate. Miami fans start to try to rush the field. All of a sudden, you see a penalty flag. Late flag on the field by field judge Terry Porter. Defensive pass interference, moving the ball to the 2-yard line. One of the most controversial pass interference calls I've ever seen. I've looked at that play millions and millions of times.
It was a good 15 seconds after the play was over with.
The play was
Not
long
five.
over. It was long over
No,
before the flag.
And I mean, 5 seconds after the play is a lot.
Yeah.
It was closer to 15.
Yeah.
Insane.
And you look back on the play, it was like it could have been a no call. It should have been like just a play on. It wasn't really that egregious. You know what I mean?
It wasn't pass interference. It wasn't. But if you're going to call that, it has to be far more timely than
more timely with a lot more conviction.
Correct.
Than just like, oh, should I? Shouldn't I? Okay, I'm gonna throw it. That's the way it seemed like. You know what I mean? But it took a lot longer. That was like a sped up version of what I just did. But
correct.
That was like the play was over. They're celebrating and everything, and then the flag comes out. I'm like, wow. Correct. You know what I mean? I mean, even Keith Jackson said that was kind of late. Keith Jackson, who was calling the game, was like, that he really took his time with that.
And it's hard enough to win a game once.
Yeah.
But when you start having to win the same game multiple times, man, it becomes really. And I'm not saying, obviously, they were in overtime. It was a full 60 minutes. That one play didn't decide the game per se. But, man, You can't do that. You can't make that call right there.
Especially at that moment, with it being that iffy, if anything, correct. That's a play on. That's a play on, especially on 4th down. Correct. So it moved the ball to the 2-yard line. Then Krenzel rushed in for a touchdown to tie the game at 24, sending the game into a second overtime. Now, back then, as now, the possession alternates. Ohio State gets the ball first, gets offense first in the second overtime. They move the ball to the Miami 5. Claret 5-yard touchdown run to give the Buckeyes a 31-24 lead. Now back come the Canes. Completion of Winslow and then a 5-yard face mask penalty, making it 1st and goal from the 6. He passed to Andre Johnson, but pass interference was called, placing the ball on the 1-yard line at 1st down once again. Miami 4 cracks at the end zone, couldn't get in. Then on 4th down, Dorsey hit as he threw by Cy Grant. His ball was incomplete, ending the game, and Ohio State wins 31-24. And I remember watching that, and I remember as soon as Dorsey dropped back to pass, the first person I was looking for was Winslow. Winslow was double covered, finally. And then Dorsey just ran out of time. And I think also he kind of panicked because his main target, I guarantee you, was Winslow. and he panicked. And as soon as he tried to throw the ball, he was being hit, and the ball went awry, and that was incomplete. Game over. Ohio State wins their first consistent national championship since 1968. And I can remember the reaction to this was like, and I'm just gonna say it just like this. It was like the same type of reaction when a few years earlier, like a decade earlier, when UNLV lost to Duke in the national semifinals in Indianapolis in the Final Four. I think that was the same type of reaction we got around the country, as if sort of like Miami with this really swaggery, brash type of team that finally got their comeuppance, you know. And this team out of nowhere where the head coach and star running back from Youngstown, Ohio, really, this really hardcore, old school style type of team won, and the really brash guys from South Beach got their comeuppance once again, like they did in '87 when they lost to Penn State. It was sort of like that same type of reaction. You know what I mean?
Of course it was, because there was a lot of parallels that between Miami and that UNLV team. Because you remember that first year UNLV was much deeper, although they weren't undefeated. But then the second year they were undefeated and more memorable, but they weren't quite as good as the previous year.
Right.
Same held true for Miami. But then on that final play, that final sequence inside the 5, it was just a multitude of compounding factors that just came in. First of all, Willis McGahee being injured really impacted that sequence.
It impacted the play calling. It impacted the play calling because they were going to run the ball. They were going to give it to McGahee at as many times as possible to try to get that 1 yard instead of them trying to throw 1 yard.
Then secondly, the ineptitude of Larry Coker, because you have to be a bit more creative than that.
Yes.
And then thirdly, the lack of mobility for Ken Dorsey, because you see, this is what I'm talking about. You're fifth in the Heisman ballot, and you're a senior quarterback. You're the leader of the ball club. Man, you got to find a way to get that damn ball in there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And it's just like you said, he dropped back, he panicked because everything isn't perfectly blocked like he's so used to do.
Right.
You have to make some plays. The other team they're a good ball club too. They're playing hard too. They're on scholarship too. Sometimes everything isn't going to be crystal clear, wide, dead open for you. Hell, you got to make a play sometime.
The question I had is,
do it.
You make reads when you're a quarterback. You step up to the line and you make reads. I haven't played quarterback since I was in junior high, but I could look at that defense the way Ohio State was playing. I would have dropped back 3 steps and it opened wide open for him. Why he didn't just take off?
Dude, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this, man. You would have scored. You would have got it in. I'm telling you. You would have got it in, man. And then you're going to lose to a team. You're going to lose a team that got an absolute bum at quarterback, and then a running back that Rudy Huxtable is better than. Because in terms of explosiveness, you know what I mean. Because Corrette was
a very good power runner, but he had no speed.
No speed. And you lose to that combination. And especially considering you had this experience advantage too, that is unforgivable.
Yeah.
It's unforgivable.
Right.
Now,
the University of Miami wasn't the same after that. They kind of fell off of a cliff after this happened. And this was kind of like the springboard of the Ohio State program that we see today. This game was like a springboard for that because all the way through the 80s and 90s, they were always the stepchild to Michigan. And this kind of propelled them to what we see today, winning championships when they, a few years ago, and then last year winning the national championship. Miami, on the other hand, they hadn't really been the same since. they've had a couple of forays into the top 10, and even this year they're back into the top 10, but still, I don't know but they haven't really quite been back to the true dominance of what,
Well,
of what we've known to be for the University of Miami, going all the way back to the Schnellenberger days.
I attribute that to a variety of factors because I think more than any other team, Miami and Florida State was most affected by the rise of the SEC
Yes.
overall. Because like a lot, I know just speaking for Louisiana in particular, like I've mentioned a few times. Now it used to be, Louisiana is like, even though Louisiana is an entire state, North Louisiana and South Louisiana are culturally two different states,
Yeah.
and usually, all of your dominant D linemen and O linemen are from North Louisiana, and then all of your skill position players are from South Louisiana a lot of
Yeah.
times. But back then, if you were from inner city, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Miami, Colorado, Nebraska, Florida State. So
Yep.
then when Saban got there, because you mentioned earlier Saban's second year, his very first objective was to secure the state of Louisiana and establish a solid recruiting base there. And then similar other states like Mississippi has a lot of great players. Alabama, so does Georgia. Like a lot of those guys would normally wind up down in Florida someplace.
Right.
A lot of those guys were staying home, which led to a lot of the string. What was it? SEC won like 7 or 8 straight BCS titles or something
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
And I think the ascension of the Southeastern Conference really was attributed to the decline of Miami, because a lot of players they historically would have gotten, they were no longer getting.
Well, I mean, to your point, I mean, just use my high school, for example, New Iberia Senior High School in New Iberia, Louisiana. Two of the greatest players, two of the greatest football players to have ever played for New Iberia Senior High School he went to Texas A&M, a running back by the name of Johnny Hector, who later went on to play for the New York Jets.
The New York Jets. I remember that.
Yeah.
Him and
Johnny
Freeman McNeil.
Yeah.
Yes.
Johnny Hector was was a star running back from our high school back in the 70s. In fact, he teamed up with a coach that we're going to talk about a little bit later on in our shout out. Led New Iberia to their only state championship appearance in football in the 1970s. And another linebacker, he played defensive end, but another great player from our high school, a man by the name of Leroy Etienne, which is the cousin of the Black Rhino, Clifford Etienne. Who went to Nebraska. And Johnny Hector went to Texas A&M, could have went to LSU. And Leroy Etienne was one of the greatest defensive players I ever saw with these two eyes, and he went to Nebraska. These are two cats that could have easily gone to LSU, but they chose. Right. One went to Texas, one went to College Station, Texas, and played for Texas A&M. The other one went all the way up to Lincoln, and Leroy Etienne played a couple of years in the NFL with the 49ers, so. Right. Those are two instances from my own personal recollection, from my own personal life, that I remember watching as a kid when they were in high school. I remember watching that, to your point, went to other places instead of staying right in state, which they would have happened had they played like maybe some 20 years later.
Yeah, because you remember Cordell Stewart, John Eric had to go to Colorado. Marshall Faulk, as great as he was, he went to LSU. They're like, no, you're too small. He had to go all the way to San Diego
State. Yeah, from Carver. From G.W. Carver in New Orleans.
You remember the Joseph brothers, Big and Vance Joseph.
Yep.
They were from Louisiana. They wound up going to Nebraska and Colorado, respectively. Just all kinds of big time. Warren Dunn, Florida State.
Florida State, right there from
big time players.
Yeah, we went to Catholic High of Baton Rouge.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All kinds of great players. And now those players, and which is to this day, they're staying home because, like a lot of times, even the Big Ten was good then, but it's like, man, a lot of them guys like, hell, I'm not going up there and playing no 10-degree weather. I just stay home. You know what I mean? So, And that changed the landscape of college football.
Right. Great season for 2002. Unbelievable national championship game to cap off the 2002 season. And we're going to take a short break and coming right back, we're going to close out the show with a shout out. We're going to shout out to our home state that we've been talking about, our great state of Louisiana, and how the schools in our state and in our home state fared in 2002, including our alma mater, how they did in 2002. Right here on the Historically Speaking Sports podcast, right here on the Sports History Network, the place where we give you the best of sports from back in the day. And we're back here at the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. I'm Dana Augusta, along with my co-host Charles Combs, bringing you the 2002 college football season, and we're going to close things out in this episode with a look at how the schools in Louisiana did in this 2002 season. And we kind of alluded to one of the teams in the 2002 season from our home state. Of course, we're talking about the LSU Tigers. They finished 8-5, coached by Nick Saban. They were the defending SEC champions, but at the beginning of the season, they had lost Matt Mock to an injury, and they ended up losing 4 of their last 6 games. But of course, we talked about it earlier. Their most memorable game was against Kentucky in the famous Bluegrass Miracle game when Marcus Randall found Devery Henderson at the last play of the game right after they doused Guy Morris with the Gatorade, which was kind of embarrassing for him. And the rest of the Bluegrass faithful out there on the Commonwealth, in Kentucky, ended up losing. The name of the play actually was Dash Right 93 Berlin. That was the name of the play. And LSU would go on to lose in the Cotton Bowl to Texas. Okay, another Louisiana school that had a pretty good season by most standards, and right now they're in the midst of somewhat of a resurgence, and that's Tulane, led by head coach Chris Gelfo, quarterback J.P. Lossman, and running back Manuel De Moore. They finished 8-5, identical record with LSU, and they ended up winning the Hawaii Bowl 36-28 over the Hawaii, they weren't the Rainbow Warriors then. I think they're just the Warriors by this point.
Hawaii. I still call them the Rainbow Warriors. They've removed the rainbow from it.
Yeah, I think they became like just the regular Hawaii Warriors sometime in the late 90s or the early 2000s. They just became just the regular, just became the Warriors, and they had those really cool looking green uniforms, which I really like. With the little Hawaiian print on them and stuff. I think it's pretty dope. I've always did like theirs. Another school, the school I almost went to, the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. First season of head coach Ricky Bustle, they were in the midst of a big time struggle trying to revamp the program after Nelson Stokely brought the program to some kind of prominence. The father of future NFL receiver Brandon Stokely. They finished 3-9 on the year. The other Louisiana system team, UL Monroe, they were still the Indians at this point. They weren't going to be the Warhawks until like a few years from now. They were still the Indians. One of the famous players to come out of there, of course, is Stan Humphries, Charger fame.
Marty Booker.
Yep, Marty Booker was another one. Coached by Bobby Keesler, and Bobby Keesler was the coach at my high school alma mater, New Iberia Senior High, when they went to the state championship in 1979, losing in the state championship game, I think to John Ehret, I want to say, in the Superdome. No, I take that back. They lost to West Monroe. Anyway, Bobby Keesler was the coach of that team, and he was the coach at UM Monroe, but for the first 3 games. And then resigned, and the defensive coordinator, Mike Collins, would replace Keesler midway through the season, and UM Monroe would end up finishing 3-9 on the year. La Tech head coach Jack Bicknell, 4-8 on the season. Quarterback Luke McCown, who is now a longtime assistant coach in the NFL, is somewhat of a quarterback whisperer sort of guy around the NFL now. They also had a kicker named Josh Goby on that team. La Tech finished 4-8 on the year up there in Ruston. Okay. But of course, the main school here in Louisiana, at least for us, Southern University, our alma mater, they would finish 6-6 on the year, 5-2 in the SWAC. Pete Richardson was in his 10th season on the Bluff. Okay. Southern would upset Grambling in the Bayou Classic, 48-24. Southern had won at this point, had won 9 of the previous 10 Bayou Classics between 1993 and 2002. Okay.
Testify.
Yes, absolutely. Pete Richardson. How many Black College National Championships Pete Richardson ended up winning? Like 5?
Like 5. It was like 5.
Yeah, because he won all of that while we were there. While we were students.
He won in 2003, one of his best teams. Remember?
Yes,
they
right.
won it the following year, and in conjunction with LSU. BCS win in the Sugar Bowl over Oklahoma to win the national championship. Then you remember they had the huge
parade.
I think you were back in New Iberia by then, but I was still in Baton Rouge, and they had the huge parade celebrating
both teams.
Both teams. It was a beautiful day.
Yeah. And of course, Grambling actually won the SWAC, going 11-2, 6-1 in the conference under fifth-year head coach Doug Williams. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, that Doug Williams took over as head coach at Grambling. Best Grambling team they had since the Eddie Robinson days. They would end up ended up beating Alabama State in the Black College National Championship game. But who cares about that? We beat Grambling. That's all that matters to us.
Whooped them by 4 scores.
That's
4
right.
scores. They smoked them. And speaking of Doug Williams, on a serious note, prayers out to him, because he recently announced that he has cancer, and in both of us, you and I both, that disease has kind of affected both of our families.
Yes, it has.
I'm sure it's affected many of our listeners as well. So prayers and much respect to Doug Williams, except for that Saturday after Thanksgiving. Other than that, your family, but except for that day. But we smoked you that day,
Yeah, and I think that we should do a show about the Classic right around that time, which is in a couple of weeks anyway. I think that we should do a show about the Classic and our personal recollections of the Bayou Classic.
I'm game.
Because it is something that I have experienced at the age of 8. My family would go to the Bayou Classic every year since I was 8 years old. You being in Baton Rouge, you was at the epicenter of it, just a hop, skip, and a jump from New Orleans. That's something
that's a lot of good times.
A lot of good times that we can talk about and not talk about, really.
Yeah, it's been many times, man. We have Thanksgiving dinner, man. As soon as Thanksgiving dinner over with, we jump in the car and head to New Orleans for the weekend, man. And it just, and it's not like it is now. I mean, it used to be a lot of fun, a lot of prestige, a lot of class. Now it's kind of marked. It's marked with some elements that rather some unnecessary elements. But I hope it can return back to its previous prestige and glory.
Exactly. I mean, it's the only Sunday. It's the only time of year that you would go to church And the Sunday before the Classic, you could tell who were the Southern fans and who the Grambling fans, because the Grambling fans would be on one side of the church and the Southern fans would be on the other side of the church. And you basically like, okay, I'm a Southern fan, so I got to sit over here this Sunday, and that was like that in every black church all the way through Louisiana.
Correct. And even at dinner, like my family, I know like a lot of family on my mom's side have Grambling State alums and all that. It's like, man, whatever. They, every year we beat them 10 years in a row. Every year, y'all cheated this year. Man, we won like 9 years straight. How can you cheat 9 years straight? Like how? But anyway.
And not only that, what about all the times that Eddie Robinson and Grambling used to beat Southern?
Correct.
What about that? You know what I mean?
And then also for our viewers too, we used to win. We win the Battle of the Bands every year. We win the fifth quarter every year too. We eat them. We eat them up too. Shout out Human Jukebox, best band in the land.
On.
For people outside the country, look them up. Look them up. You will be thoroughly impressed. Look them up.
That's it. They're all over YouTube. Trust me, I found them. But anyway, Chuck, once again, it was great to have you on board tonight to talk about the 2002 college football season. It was a lot of fun. It was a blast as always.
It was a ton of fun, man, and I hope all the listeners, I hope you enjoyed hearing the discussion as much as we enjoyed having it, man. Thank you guys, as always, for checking us out.
All right. And with that, we'll be right back right after this short break. You're listening to the Historically Speaking Sports podcast right here on the Sports History Network. Thank you once again for joining us here on the Historically Speaking Sports podcast. And once again, this podcast comes to you from the Bill King Memorial Studio here in the sports wing of TM4 Enterprises, located in suburban Atlanta in the shadow of Stone Mountain. And once again, please do not forget to subscribe, like the show. It really helps us out on our algorithms here on the internet. And also be sure to let people know about what you hear here. As always, I tell people, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers, tell your neighbors, hell, tell a passerby on the street if you think that they like sports history. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
The Sports History Network, where legends live on and the past plays loud. Welcome to the place where history's proud, from gridiron glory to the hardwood stars, from the racetrack heat to Olympic bars. It's the voices, the stories, the moments you miss, told by fans and pros who live for this. Hook and Themic, the Sports History Network, where the past comes alive. Podcasts and blogs that keep the flame high, from Babe to Brady, Alley to the Dome. If it's history and sports, then this is the home. SportsHistoryNetwork.com, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.